Welcome to another edition of Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. My name is Mahlangeni, and I'm the chair of the board of MORE, which is Moving Omaha for Race Equity, which is a nonprofit organization based out of Omaha that addresses equity and anti-racism issues in our community and in our society. Today, we have a special guest. We're going to talk about some issues related to legal issues in Nebraska. And I want to get the show on because I know we may not have enough time looking at the number of people who've signed up for this Facebook Live as well as this Zoom meeting here. Potso Mahlangeni is a graduate of the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. He attended after that UNO and did some coursework in graduate studies. And subsequently, he studied law and he attended law school in Durham, North Carolina. After graduation, he worked in a firm in New York City, helping clients deal with Social Security disabilities. He subsequently moved to get a job with the federal government and is currently dealing with Social Security and issues related to that. He's also based here in Omaha, and he's doing some work on legal issues dealing with people related to discrimination and so on. He's a member of the New York Bar Association, the North Carolina Bar Association, and the Nebraska Bar Association. He's also a Omega Psi fraternity member and a volunteer of the National Legal Council. He helps with some of the issues in their fraternity. We invited Potso to discuss his journey to law school, some of the challenges he's faced, and issues impacting African Americans attorney, particularly in Nebraska. Potso, welcome to Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. And I want to first start you off by giving us a little more background on yourself. I kind of provide a brief intro, but I always let my guests provide a little bit more. So tell the audience a little bit more about yourself.
All right. Thank you for having me. Omaha, Nebraska, born and raised. Went to Omaha Northwest High School. So if there's any Huskies in the house, please shout me out in the chat. After Northwest High School, I went to the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and subsequently matriculated through UNL. After that, I came back to Omaha, and I worked in a company called Owens and Associates, and we were doing some basically family support services and things of that nature. After that, I went to work for Metro Community College, and then subsequently, it switched on in my head that this was my time to actually head to law school, and I headed to law school at the North Carolina Central University, and graduated from there. And currently I am a owner of a law firm, Bind in Law, and I focus my practice on discrimination, harassment, Title VII issues, and anything dealing with discrimination in our community, specifically Omaha, Nebraska. And I've been doing that for approximately 2.5, 3 years. So it's been a challenge for me, but it's been one of those challenges that have been a labor of love, and it's been growing tremendously. So I look forward to talking with you all and answering all your questions later on in the show.
Good. Why don't I start off with the first question? After law school, you spent a year in Omaha looking for legal work, and you volunteered one summer with Nebraska Legal Society. Why did you leave Nebraska?
It's a great question. So when I went to law school, one of the reasons why I went to law school is I wanted to be a lawyer that works on progressive legal issues. And when I came back to Nebraska in 2011, after finishing law school, there wasn't a lot of opportunities that were available to me that related to some of the things I wanted to do. And again, I went to law school for the specific purpose of working on these progressive legal issues. So I subsequently moved to New York, in which it helped me accomplish some of those goals. But I can tell you in Nebraska, it's just hard to find those organizations that are dealing with some of the things that we're related to, like social justice, stamping out discrimination, stamping out poverty in all areas of the government and society. So that's kind of why I went to New York. It gave me that opportunity to learn up front and up close as a novice lawyer. And then I was able to bring back some of those talents and experiences to Nebraska 10 plus years later.
One of the strongest African-American Facebook creators often talks about Blacks in Nebraska. He also says if we want change, we have to take folks to court. What makes that process so important, and why are more people not using court systems to get legal redress in light of all the problems we have in the state as African-Americans and people of color?
Wow, that's a good question. So I mean, let's think about that and let's unpack that, right? So if you understand the history of our people in this country, right, the legal system was what allowed us to advance some of the changes that we are experiencing today and some of the changes that we benefit from today, right? The Constitution was never written by us or for us. The Declaration of Independence wasn't written by us or for us, but eventually through the 14th Amendment, those were some of the things we were able to use to get progressive change in this society, right? So I urge everyone to to review and understand what the 14th Amendment is, because I can tell you back then, you know, we didn't have representation in the legislative body, Congress, or anything of that nature. We didn't have access to voting. So I think understanding that the legal avenue was our number one tool in getting to where we are today. And again, obviously, we have a long way to go. But if you think about all the major substantive changes that we've had, it's been through the legal system. And again, they say we're a nation of laws, right? So if you understand that concept, that's how we are able to get redress for some of the things that we are complaining about, that we have to go through on a daily basis, especially in this city and in this state. So one of my goals, especially of going to law school, was I wanted to give access to the courts to the people who look like me, people who think like me, and the people who may have not had access to these types of things. So I take calls all the time, just even going through, well, what does it mean to file a claim? What does it mean? How do we do that? But if we don't have these conversations or this education between lawyers and, you know, non-lawyers or people who are going through these things, we won't get far. So that's one of the things, remember, they try to close out, is access to the legal system. And obviously it's a fight that goes on, but every day I wake up and we chip and we chip and we chip, just like it's been going on for generations and generations. So remember, the court is your friend, not your enemy.
You know, I wanted to interview two African Americans from the Midland Bar Association, or the Black Lawyers Association of Nebraska. I even wrote to them and they never responded. I think a couple of them might be teaching University of Nebraska Lincoln, but again, couldn't find them. And I understand that they're adjuncts there. Despite sending emails and calling the department about a year ago, I'm still awaiting a response. I've talked to Tim Ashford. He's disappointed in the work, the advocacy issues. What is the Midlands Bar Association's significant accomplishment? And again, I know you haven't been there dealing with them a lot, but what do you think they've done? Because I can't see nothing they've done from my vantage point.
Well, let me clean my glasses real quick. Hold on. I might be able to see it if I clean them. But I don't know. I mean, that's unfortunately, I think we need to get back to that. And I think they have kind of strayed away. But essentially, the analysis needs to be, what major project are we accomplishing, right? What major social justice project are we accomplishing? And I think that's something that we all need to, as Black lawyers, Black law students, or the Midland Bar Association or whatever, needs to get back to, because essentially those are the things that we were doing back in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. Remember, Brown versus Board of Education, you know, that was 1954, right? Prior to any sorts of Civil Rights Act, we were able to get redress to the court. So I think as lawyers, as Black attorneys, we can't stray away from that. So I challenge, obviously, the Midland Bar Association and any Black bar association to do something that is progressive within the community, because we need it. We need it. And I can tell you, because I get calls all the time about people that need help relating to civil rights related issues in this community.
Some have criticized the lack of adequate legal representation in civil and criminal cases. How important is it to have a Black attorney in Nebraska, as contrast maybe to a white attorney and so on?
Well, I can maybe give you this analogy. I don't think I've ever had my hair cut by a white barber. So I can kind of tell you that's how important it is to have a Black attorney, especially if you're dealing with issues related to race. And I can tell you, I've gotten cases from individuals who were previously represented by white attorneys, and they weren't able to see the same things that I was able to see. And some of those cases were successful. So again, it's critical, just because, you know, it's like walking into the, and I can remember, you know, shout out to my third grade teacher, Mrs. Huggins. I can never forget walking into that classroom and seeing that Black teacher and how I felt. that's the exact same analysis when your client walks in and they see you and you're able to relate to them and you're able to take the issues and you're able to win on those issues. So anyone that's interested in law, obviously these are the things that are important to us as Black attorneys, is to make sure that we're able to issue spot and we're able to bring these issues that relate to our African American or minority clients to the forefront.
Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit is that there are, again, the thing that I think is important here, there are many potential cases you've been dealing with and so on. And I guess there are two cases that came to mind that you were successful. Please give us an overview of those cases and why were they so problematic from your perspective?
All right, so that's a good question. So let me.
I know they're long cases, but if you can kind of briefly kind of give us a
I-
synopsis of what the case is and then tell us why they were so problematic.
So just generally speaking, the type of law that I practice would be employment law, Title VII. So anything dealing with discrimination related to your employment. So I can tell you these cases aren't being brought a lot. So a lot of the times when we go through those type of issues in our employment, our first reaction is to say, guess what? I'm done. I quit and go on. And I think employers, especially in this city and state, are used to that. So essentially, they think they can get away with anything. So obviously, the law is the law, and I understand that. But I don't think they understand that. So the issue why they're so problematic in my mind is that a lot of things they're doing aren't comporting with the law, and we're able to call them out on that. And again, the only way to do that is through litigation. So I've had some great clients who are able to successfully navigate themselves through 2+ years of litigation, and we were able to prevail. But it happens every day, all the time, that there's issues with employers that relate to discrimination, harassment, even disability discrimination, and they don't know the law. They're just used to saying, well, this is an at-will state. We can fire you for any reason. And that's true. But we can't fire you for an illegal reason, and we can't fire you for a discriminatory reason. And that's where binding law comes in.
Over the years, I've challenged legal aid, Nebraska Appleseed, ACLU to hire African-American attorneys who are connected to our community. Can advocacy organization make a difference if they focus on our community? And again, I will tell you that ACLU has never hired an African-American in their history. And I think they recently hired an African-American woman recently, but I don't know anything about her. Legal aid has a dismal record of hiring African-Americans and so on. And one of the issues I'm raising to you is if those organizations who are advocacy organizations were doing their jobs and had African-Americans, do you think they can make a change in some things you see in Nebraska?
Of course, right? Of course. And I can attest that, I've lived other places and I can say, I've been litigating cases for probably 3-4 years in this city, in this state. And I can't tell you one case that, in terms of litigation, that some of those advocacy organizations have brought. And again, litigation is the pathway to change, right? That's how you change specific policy. That's how you change all of those things in the community. So it's difficult for me to comment because I haven't seen any sort of cases or any sort of advocacy coming from those organizations. Now, again, I'm not saying they don't do, positive work, which they probably do. But again, I haven't seen a press release. I haven't seen a claim. I haven't seen any sort of substantive legal victory that those organizations have had. And again, maybe it's an attest to the lack of diversity in those organizations. But I mean, I guess the proof's in the pudding at that point, right?
Well, I know sometimes when I make phone calls to them or write letters, they don't respond. So I'm wondering if they really even exist at times. And again, I've been here for a long time, and I'm really disappointed in the lack of what they do and the lack of, again, I assume they've passed the bar association, but you don't see them in North and South. I'm on the level about the related to the amount of money they get in their income. I want to ask you another question. What are some unmet needs you see for increasing justice for African Americans in Nebraska? Again, if you had a magic wand, what's an unmet need that we have from your vantage point?
Oh, I don't. I don't know if we have enough time for that. I mean, that's uh I can tell you just recently, right? I'm starting to get my feet wet with criminal law. And I can tell you, a lot of the white lawyers um, are interested in number one. And again, this is just from my perspective, in pleading their clients out, right? Instead of actually fighting and defending the cases. And remember, in a criminal law case, right, the government has the burden of proving the case beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a pretty high standard. And all I got to do as a defense attorney is find one little hole, poke one little hole in their case, and their whole case will fall. But it takes work. But instead of doing that work, I can have that conversation with my client. And this is obviously not the right way to do it, is to say, well, you know, either you plead this out and get 5 years, or we take it to trial and you're probably going to lose it and get 25. You want to go to your home to your kids, or do you not? And then obviously they're in a very precarious situation. And what do? Probably going to plead it out. So again, that's one unmet need, is actually understanding the client's perspective and actually trying to take these cases and win these cases, right? You hired me to win. You didn't hire me to plead it out. So that's one of the things I've seen in the criminal side. On the civil side, you know, there's two types of lawyers, right? There's the lawyer that wants to change and do things and, take things to, make things better in terms of social justice or civil rights. So I call those civil rights lawyers. And then there's civil settlement lawyers, right? They're not really interested in anything. They're just trying to see what they can do to get this case to settle quick, fast, and hurry, so they go on to the next one. So I've seen both of those, especially here, but it's troubling when I see a case where I'm like, okay, this is a really strong case, but you weren't able to take this to fruition simply because, you're not really interested in this type of law, right? You kind of perceive it as personal injury. So I think those are some of the things that I would like to see come to play here in Nebraska in terms of the next generation of lawyers.
Well, 2 points I want to make is number one, and I don't know if Tommy Warren told me this confidentially or whatever, but I'll throw it out. He said when I was doing the work with Douglas County racial ethnic disparities, he said that, I mean, oftentimes lawyers and people in certain positions get these young kids to plead to things they're not guilty of. And he knew that as a police chief, and he shared that with me. But again, there was no steps to deal with that in our community. The second thing that I know is when we invited, we invited the county attorney out to come and talk to the community, he refused. We even said, can you come out and talk at your time, whatever, to talk about how do you arrive at certain cases, who do you help, yada, yada, no support. But Tom Riley, the public defender, came out and talked, but I was surprised that there was really no African Americans or really many people of color on his staff. And I'm like, how does that happen when you're using public funds? But again, those are some of my concerns, and we need to talk about that more as a community. The other question I have is I try to get the Douglas County, as I said earlier, to the community forum. Again, and we're not cheerleaders for anybody. And we had, again, I said earlier, what did you take away from that event you were at? You were there that time. You heard Tom Riley talk about some of the racism and the elitism and some of the crazy stuff, laws that we have in Nebraska and how we treat people. And you were there as an attorney. What was it like watching and engaging and hearing him talk as a person who's been in a job for about over 40 years, I think. He's been there longer than most people. But what do you think? What do you think of that particular night?
I heard him, right? Um, but again, I'm looking for substance. I'm looking for, what can you show me? I don't know if the saying goes, I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. But you know, the issue is that these problems still exist, right? And um, I guess in the legislative branch, right, if you were doing the same job over and over again for years and years, and you weren't producing any sort of fruit, you'd have to answer to the voters, right? And I don't know if just because it's a legal analysis that we're just comfortable with saying, okay, they're here, they're doing a good job or allegedly doing a good job. They're here, let it go. But I don't know. I don't know any sort of substantive victory that they've had either procedurally within the public defender's office. And again, I get these cases all the time, and I don't do criminal law, but I can tell you that, it's a major, major issue, especially in this community, because you don't have a lot of advocates who are willing to take these cases and take them to trial and win them, because again, there's a lot of, uh, uh, you know, let's just say, for lack of a better word, issues with the police, right? And those things can be challenged. And if we're not challenging those things, then we're going to let good enough continue to prevail. So that's why I think it's important for us to continue the fight and to call out these organizations that aren't really producing much fruit. Because again, the proof's in the pudding. And if there's nothing there, we can't eat anything.
The other thing, going back to legal aid, and we did Karen Abrams and I did a workshop for them probably years ago, and they didn't invite us back because I think we threw out too much heavy light. But what I found unproblematic is back in the day, they used to go in the North and South. I'm going to do community forums to give an update in that. I have not seen any of them. And I think the same thing with ACLU. You don't see any mileage records. I mean, they operate behind plexiglass. And so it's kind of unfortunate these folks graduate from law school and they get on their pet peeves and run on their issues, and they don't deal with the masses of people who are suffering under the yoke of apartheid Omaha and the segregation that exists in our plantation schools and so on. I want to switch up and ask you, do you have any advice for community public advocacy people or elected officials in this state? So, for example, what kind of feedback would you offer to public officials, and particularly you're talking about state senators or city council, county commissioners, whoever, if they want to improve our legal system, make it better or fluid to help many of the people who are locked in at the bottom, and particularly people of color? So what kind of advice would you offer them to deal with public policy issues if we're going to change laws in the state, both locally and nationally?
First and foremost, obviously, listen to your constituents, right? What are some of the legal issues that are pushing them to the bottom, right? Figure out what those are, right? Is it inadequate representation? What is it, right? And then push and continue to make those issues on the forefront. Again, I don't know if they do community forums. I don't know if they do community outreach. But again, the proof's in the pudding there. All you have to do is ask and reach out and say, okay, what do you know, or when have you seen the ACLU or the public defender or some of these governmental organizations within the community, right? If you don't see those type of things, I can tell you they're not going to know. And the issue with the law is that, if you don't have a correct advocate, the judge is not going to advocate for you. And I can tell you the prosecutor isn't either.
Well, we know that looking at what we got here in Douglas County, AOL in the community on community, again, disengaging people and so on. Before we switch up to letting the participants or audience to ask you direct questions, I was going to ask you another question. How long does it take to go through law school? And was it easy or hard for you? And especially coming from the Omaha Plantation School. Oh, that slipped, Omaha Public Schools. I got to slip that in my public schools because they don't even respond to letters, correspondence, and can't get any data from any of them on anything related to African Americans. But what's that like for you as a backdrop? And again, there are not a lot of African American lawyers who have a certain level of students in it and who grew up and went through Northwest High. But what is that like for you going through that journey?
Well, I was very fortunate, right? Because I had parents that very, very into making sure we had adequate education at home, right? And that was always a forefront for me, was in making sure I made my education my priority. So when I went to law school, I took it seriously. When I went to undergrad, I took it seriously. I wasn't playing around. It was something that was very, very serious to me, like it was a job. So was it hard? Yeah, but it was fair. Did it take a lot of work? Yeah, it did, but I did well. And the reason I did well is I've always put my education first because I knew that was a gateway to where I wanted to go. So yes, it was difficult. Yes, maybe I went to OPS, but again, I had a lot of support with my family and I had a lot of support with friends and obviously the fraternity that helped me get through that. And without those things, maybe I wouldn't have got through it. But, I remember looking back when I was getting ready to apply. I was at that crossroads in life. I was 25 years old, and I was thinking about staying at my current job or going to law school and just, quitting my job and doing what I had to do it. And I looked back I was thinking at the time, I was like, well, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And if I don't do it, how will I feel 10, 15, 20 years from now if I didn't? And thankfully, I'll never have to answer that question. So yes, it was difficult. Yes, it was hard, but it was fair and it was a lot of work and it was work that I enjoyed. And now I get to do what I want to do and help out and do my civil rights project, which would be working in Omaha, Nebraska, and taking this Title VII and taking my law firm to the next level.
Now, I know you're a Kansas City fan. I want to do a change up or call an audible. What is it like living in New York City as compared to Nebraska? If you had to talk, because some people have never been to New York and they don't know what it's like, but contrast New York and Nebraska before we move on. What was
Sure.
that like living there, coming from Nebraska and particularly North Omaha?
Well, Nebraska, I can tell you, New York is, imagine walking down the street, you have every single culture just walking right with you. At one point, you can hear English. Next minute, you can hear Spanish. The next minute, you can hear Arabic. I mean, at any given time. And that's one of the things that I got to look back on my life and say that literally changed my worldview. Because when I went there, I was born and raised in Nebraska. I went to North Carolina, but living there in New York, you're literally around every culture in this world, and it's completely different. Obviously, it's crowded, maybe it's dirty, but you live there for the people and you live there for the learning experience that you can't get anywhere in the world.
Yeah. Well, Potso, at this point, what we normally do, and I didn't allude to this in the beginning, we normally only interview our guests for 30 minutes, and then we open it up for the audience to share things, either chat or directly talk to you. So at this point, if you have a question or a comment to Potso, keep it briefly because we have a number of people on this set, and we only have about 30 minutes or so. We may call it audible later and go longer, but we want to give people a chance if there's a question. I do know some people have put some stuff in the chat, but we'd love to have you say it directly to Potso for other people in the audience to hear what you got to say. So open up your mic and throw out some heavy light, as we say. I saw a couple of folks in the chat, but those who wrote in the chat, do you want to say something directly or raise a question or comment?
Good evening. Good evening. This is Lackham Rose. First and foremost, thank you for opening up this forum for us to listen in. Very fruitful. I do have a question for you, Potso. What guidance would you provide to an individual who perceives politics and law as daunting due to the negative stigma associated with political engagement?
Right. That's a great question. I would focus on some of the issues that you are near and dear to your heart, right? Do I watch CNN all day? No. Do I listen to NPR all day? Maybe, but no. But find an issue that moves you, right? Find that issue and advocate for that. I mean, there's nothing more important than doing something that's going to benefit others and doing something that's bigger than you. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you see things, is that politics and law are some of the gateways to that, right? So just don't focus on the entire legal realm or the entire political atmosphere. Find an issue that you believe in and go for it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other feedback, other reactions.
Hey, I'll go. Good evening. How are you?
Hello there. How you doing, Mrs.
I
Crawford?
am doing really well. So I know you went to HBCU, and this question may have a different lens for you, literally a different lens for you than some that would have gone to law school in Nebraska. So my question is this: we know that systemic racism has been deeply entrenched in just a culmination of racist laws that have infected every single aspect of our society, including education, banking, housing, the criminal legal system, you name it. I often talk to individuals, and I know you do as well. So can you talk some about the role you believe that law schools have from a moral and social responsibility lens to end systemic racism as they are training new lawyers to come out into the trenches?
Oh, oof. That's a nice question. It's very loaded, but I like it. You have to train lawyers, especially African American lawyers, to not be scared to litigate. I cannot stress that enough. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to go through things. But at the end of the day, these are the challenges you have to go through in order to successfully litigate these cases. And again, I can't speak for Creighton. I can't speak for University of Nebraska Lincoln because I did not go there for law school. But what I can say, the law school I went to, they trained us to go out there and be soldiers. They trained us to go out there and to be advocates. We're social engineers, we're advocates, and we're here to effectuate change, right? And again, if you don't have that battery in your back, and if you don't learn that in law school, it's going to be equally hard. I mean, well, doubly hard to learn that on the job because you're not going to get on the job training here in Nebraska, especially with some of these white attorneys. I can tell you that, right? Because you don't belong in their good old boy system, right? If you learn that in law school and you have that battery in your back where you are going to come in here and you're going to do the work and you're not going to be scared to litigate these claims, you're going to be successful. You're going to be successful because again, I can tell you all the time, they're not used to seeing people like me, right? And when they do, it's oh, he knows how to put a subject and a predicate together. Wow.
By the way, there's a question came through the chat. It says from D. Pearl Barnett. It says on Facebook, and the question is something about talk a little bit about Social Security, your disability law, and how you see it as you address the Title 6. Is it Title issues?
Seven, yes.
7.
Yes.
Okay, man, you can see I can barely read now. Okay.
Glasses. So I can kind of speak in broad strokes is I practiced that type of law for as an advocate probably for 3 years. And I can tell you some of those issues all merge. And I mean, in general, most of these issues kind of meet somewhere in a Venn diagram, right? So my experiences there was obviously, that's when I met most of my clients were obviously number one in poverty. Most of them had a lot of issues dealing with lack of education, dealing with lack of resources. And those issues obviously stemmed from some sort of, if you can call it a racial animus, some sort of discriminatory animus that has gone on and on and on, right? So although some of those things are interrelated, obviously the law is different, right? So security is, I am attempting to get disability benefits for a client. Title VII is more so you've been treated some way at work, which is adverse, right? And it's based on a protected class, i.e. race, i.e. sex, i.e. color, i.e. national origin. So although they're two separate areas of law, I think the underlying underpinnings of some of the racial and discriminatory animus are alive in both of those.
One of the questions I want to follow up a little bit on what Terry alluded to. I've been working for years to try to get the University of Nebraska Law Center, Law University, as well as Creighton, to offer a mandatory diversity class. I even wrote to all the deans and even the dark-skinned people who work there, and I don't think anyone responded. One woman did respond, and then I asked someone a question, where was she at? They told me she died. But one of the issues I know that if you practice law and you've never dealt with race, I think it'd be problematic. And the question I'm asking is, was there a mandatory course ever offered about race in your undergraduate, I mean, your graduate in law school? Because I know in Nebraska, they don't have any courses that are mandatory. I think there's one course in Creighton, but I think 10 people might register a semester. But is there any course like that that you know that people have to take in law school that's mandatory on race issues?
I don't want to use the word mandatory. I want to use the word customary,
What does that
right?
mean?
It means everyone was doing it, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
it wasn't a situation where you had to take this class to learn, right? And also, it's not about also the class, it's also about what type of lens is constitutional law being taught? What type of lens is property law being taught? What type of lens is contract law being taught? And if it's being taught from a Eurocentric lens, it's you're going to learn about it differently, right? And obviously here, what I don't want to happen, or I don't want it to be a band-aid where they say we're going to take everyone to have one class called Blacks in Law, and they're going to take that class and say this is your one class that you have to take, and if you take this class, you now get the stamp as being certified in race relations in Omaha, Nebraska. And I don't think that's going to cut it, right? It's not going to cut it. So again, if your clients are African Americans, or if you're dealing with issues that relate to the legislator or politics or things like that, you need to understand these issues. And if you only have taken one class in out of 88 credit hours in law school that you took in your third year that you may or may not have been sleeping in, I don't think it gives you the golden ticket to say I'm safe.
By the way, other questions, other feedback, other folks, there's chat feedback. We have a number of people on this, and we'd hope to hear other people talk.
Hey, Potso. Hey, all Jamal. Greetings from Ghana.
Hello.
Awesome to see you guys. Potso, I want to give you a thumbs up. There is such a economic stronghold of castration, if you will, of our people in Nebraska. And so by the time people have the discipline, the finances, and the wherewithal to go to law school, they're in it for a payday. Most aren't in it to represent civil rights cases or disability cases or the proletariat at the bottom. So I commend you on your effort and you're even wanting to represent that particular clientele. My question for you is, as Black people, we experience racism all the time. After getting the courage to say the thing out loud, whatever happened, we have to deal with people not believing us, not believing what we experienced is real, thinking that we are on one. And so that further discourages us from partaking in the legal process like you talked about. How can you talk to that and shed some light on that, please?
Sure. Great question. And I appreciate your kind words. And that kind of piggybacks or segues back to what I was telling you guys, the group before in our conversation, is that that's the importance of having an attorney who is an African American or Black attorney. Because I tell my clients who are going through some of the things that they're going through is that I've lived in America all my life, so I've went through this stuff too, right? And I get it, right? So tell me what happened, tell me what went on, and tell me what their reason for it was. And again, if you are going to, for example, a white attorney, they may not understand. And let me not say may, they will not understand 9 out of 10 times, right? So that's just doubles down on the importance of having Black counsel or having an African American attorney who can relate to some of the things you're going through. So yes, you are believed, yes, and these cases can be proven. And how you prove them is you show that the non-discriminatory reason that they're offering is pretextual. It doesn't make sense when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, right? Case in point, you were late on day 1, but we fired you on day 30, right? That's the reason why we let you go. But in between day 1 and day 30, there was a bunch of discriminatory acts going on, right? Again, that doesn't make logical sense. And I get those cases all the time. So, the worst thing I always tell people is to let your voice go unheard. So if there's anything going on, like I tell all of my clients, is that I want to hear from you so I can be able to assess and say, okay, there's the smoking gun, and they're not going to see it.
Other questions, other feedback?
I wanted to comment. First, I'd say I think it's so important, as you said, it's about the support that many Blacks have, where you came from, your parents supported your education. No matter what the school system was, they supported you in education to make sure you were focused on it. And unfortunately, that's not a lot that happens in OPS. So I commend your parents and you for acknowledging that. The second thing I'd like to say is part of the problem I see here in Omaha, Nebraska, is that going to Creighton, Blacks who go to Creighton and UNL, many of those, I don't know if they couldn't pass the bar or didn't pass the bar, some of them didn't even take the bar because they were kind of taught to go to class, sit in this class, and when you get out, we'll give you a nice little cushion job at KCA or ABC Corporation, and they settle for that. And so therefore, it's already decreases the amount of representation that we have to choose from. And to piggyback on that is when you say it's good if you have a Black representative as an attorney. However, just because you're Black and you may look like you may not be Black, because people have a tendency to say, okay, well, I'm Black and I'm working on this case and my client who is Black. But many of the attorneys on the criminal side here in Nebraska, they plead their clients out just like white attorneys. They don't come into, I've been to several cases, court cases. I've sat inside. I've had relatives, unfortunately, that have been in that. And I see that they do the same thing because they're not coming out and being forceful. They're not coming in there as being soldiers. They're just coming in there for that paycheck to get through and to move on because they have accepted what the policy is here in Nebraska. And I was wondering, do you see that as well in Nebraska or Omaha when you go and you talk to other attorneys? Like right now, I know several attorneys, Black attorneys, and I probably wouldn't go to one of them. Not one.
Okay, then we're gonna come to your question because we got people on here one question. So let's answer that question.
So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
My question was, do you see that in here in Omaha?
Yeah,
okay.
Great question. My main thing is this, right? I'm looking at where they were educated at, and my issue would be if you came through Creighton or you came through UNL, and that was kind of the policy in terms of how you were educated, in terms of how you were taught to litigate these cases. And again, I didn't go there, so I can't speak to that. But where I went, they taught us to be sharks. They taught us to fight for social justice, right? That's where I went to law school. And if they went to law school somewhere where they taught them, hold your breath for 3 years and get out, we're gonna let you get a job at GlaxoSmith and you're gonna make a decent salary, just don't make any waves. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But again, I think one of the things I would like to challenge is what are they teaching us in those law schools? Number one. And number two, what is the bar passage rate at those law schools for African Americans? So if we're just admitting one or two so we can say we have an African American at our law school and we're not cultivating them, we're not educating them, or not training them, when they come out, what do you expect?
You know, let me interject quickly that Moore did a study on the university graduation rate of African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and Asians. And what we found out is it was dismal for African Americans. So you have people who graduate from high school who are functionally literate, who can't even go to college. But what happened is they're getting a lot of free grades in our school system. And so the point we raised is that very point that if you go to law school and you don't practice law, you fail. Where are the studies? Where are the academic folks doing the research on that? So what good is a high school education if basically it doesn't prepare you to do something, or when they educated you, they educate you to be, as Bob Marley would say, the brainwashed fool. And so again, when you see the low graduation rates or not passing the bar exam, you wonder what kind of education it is. So if someone is a physician and they graduate from medical school and they can't do basic medical stuff, you're going to question that medical school or that person. But those are good questions. I see there are other questions here in the chat, so let's move on. Keep it moving. Someone asked a question here. It says, everything that is legal isn't always ethical and vice versa. Do you think that when dealing with African Americans in the courts of law, a blind eye oversees the ethical standpoints to justice for us?
I'm going to try to answer that question best I can. Everything isn't legal, isn't ethical, and that's technically true, right? And I look at it this way: is that if there's an argument to be made, right, that you can push an issue, then you push it, especially if it's going to paint your client in the best possible light. And sometimes the laws aren't, they're not updated. They're archaic. They're not in touch with society, right? So think of in medicine, we're constantly, every time you're learning, you're constantly something new, and we're trying to debunk the previous hypothesis. With law, we're going back and we're citing laws from 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and saying this is the case law. And in order to change it, we need a client or a plaintiff to do so and to bring these issues up. So again, and that's partly why we elect progressive legislators to do so, because case law is very, very archaic, right? Again, the discrimination case law came out in 1964, and there's obviously been subsequent updates to that, but 1964 is a completely different time than it is now.
You know, the ethical question raised puts a different kind of concept for me. This is a strange question, but I'll throw it out. Oftentimes, lawyers want to win at all costs. And so, for example, if you know one of your clients is guilty of something, meaning he's a drug dealer or something, he comes to you and they want you to get him off, ethically, are you bound to defend that person, which obviously lawyers do that regardless to get him off? But are you wrestling with an ethical issue when you know that a person may be guilty of a crime, but they also have the right to attorney? How do you address those kind of issues from a problematic point of view?
Well, great question. So you can take any case that you want, right? But essentially, the government has the burden of proving that you've done this beyond a reasonable doubt. As a defendant, you can just sit here and say, we are going to say nothing and we're going to let the government do its job. But if the government does not do its job, then you have a verdict of what? Not guilty, which is different than innocent. You do not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you did it. So again, I know you've seen cases where they have, pulled someone over and maybe there was pounds and pounds and pounds of marijuana in the car, and they arrested them and they went to jail. And lo and behold, the stop was what? Illegal. They shouldn't have stopped the car. But at that point, anything that's subsequent to that stop is thrown out. So if you don't have the marijuana, you can't convict them. So, but I also think there's got to be procedures in place to say, okay, well, these are the rules you have to play by. Because if you don't give them rules, guess what? Right? you're going to go back into the 1850s and 1860s or, well, 1960s, but you got to give them rules to play by, right? And if that means, some things aren't ethical as you see them, okay, fine. But, you can't have cops and you can't have a criminal justice that does whatever the heck they want.
Well, yeah, it's funny you mention that because I find it almost ludicrous and stupid and asinine where the police department came out and said they had 62 complaints and they didn't find merit on the behalf of the client or the community. Obviously, we know there were some lying wonders in the department, and we also know they beat up on people. But again, it goes back to if nobody sues them or bring them to court, you're not going to get that case. Other questions, other feedback. We have about 10 minutes, 8 minutes left, and so on. Other feedback.
Appreciate you, dog.
Yes, go ahead.
No, it's Zen. Thank you for answering my question.
Oh, okay. Other questions, other feedback. Any other questions?
A question.
Yes.
And really, Potso, it has to do with, you alluded early in the conversation to the kinds of discriminatory behaviors you're seeing in government institutions and other organizations. And I'm curious to hear a little bit about what kind of behaviors you're seeing on the part of these organizations that you have been successfully able to, fight for on behalf of your clients. And is there any advice that you would have to people who might be experiencing similar things in terms of how to record what's going on and that sort of thing so they can build a case?
Right, great question. Document everything, because I can tell you when you put them in a very precarious situation, I'm talking about the employer, is that you're going to watch their nose grow pretty big, right? So you have to document everything to understand, okay, why does this not make sense, right? They're going to deviate from the handbook, right? They're going to deviate from all sorts of things and say, well, this is why we do them. But again, if there is no legitimate, non-discriminatory reason, you're going to get that case to trial. And if you get it to trial, more likely than not, they're going to settle and they're going to say, okay, well, we can't have this go to court, right? So I've seen so many different things as it relates to that. But I say the number one thing is to make sure you document exactly what is going on and you make sure that you're up to speed with knowing what, obviously they're going to do. And in terms of if you see the writing on the wall that they're getting ready to try to terminate you, right? Make sure you get all your information and then you obviously call, one of those great lawyers down at Bind and Law and they'll be able to help you out.
There's another question here. It says, what about the judges in Nebraska and Omaha? Many do not feel that the judges are fair when judging Black and brown cases.
Great question. And that's why we need advocates, because if we feel that they're not fair in judging Black and brown cases, again, that's a great claim to bring, right? That's and I tell you, on those type of claims, the proof is in the data. All you got to do is get sentencing procedures or sentencing records between the judges, things of that nature that can show that they're not fair. And again, if they are, fine, but if they're not, how are we going to show that, right? And that's a great project for the ACLU or Legal Aid to undertake, because I can tell you there's probably something there.
What the other one quick question is, how do you become a judge? Do you just become a judge because you're really good as a lawyer? How does that happen? Most people don't know how you transition from being a regular lawyer to being a judge.
Either appointed or elected. So again, it's one of those things, appointed, right? Who you know, elected, kind of also who you know.
We have about 5 minutes or so. Other feedback, other questions from other people here.
I
Yes.
have a question.
Oof.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Potso, I watch a lot of TV, so sorry in advance if this is not reality, but is there any way to move your case out of Omaha out of Nebraska because you fear you won't have a fair shake?
Great question. Technically, it depends. That's the lawyer answer, right? So I always say, if I have the ability to be in state court or federal court, I'm always going to go to federal court, right? You can always go to federal court if you meet some of the requirements, which would be obviously a claim rising under federal law, right? But there's no way you can take a claim out of Nebraska if all the facts and parties reside in Nebraska. But again, if you don't think you're going to get a fair shake because you're in Nebraska, I think that also goes to some of the advocates in Nebraska, some of the things you may have seen with some of the lawyers. So remember, a judge is not going to advocate or bring a case. He's going to basically referee the case. And how he does that is it depends on kind of his as they say, well, they won't say it, but I think there's also a political underpinning to that as well. So when you're dealing with those type of judges, you've got to have a really good attorney who can take that case and be able to push them and say, well, this is the analysis, this is the law, and you have to rule with the law, which is called stare decisis.
Folks, we may have to go past our hours because we've got a number of questions coming in. I think we're on a wave here, and we have one of the highest numbers of participants in our events that we do. But we have a question, and I think Potso speaks strongly to something you might have been working on. Curious to know, Potso, what has your experience in dealing with the Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission, which says it's charged with eliminating discrimination in Nebraska? How effective that commission, in your opinion?
How effective or not effective?
Is it effective? This is how effective they're. My glasses let me play tricks on me again. I gotta get some better glasses.
Yeah,
Ophthalmologist, come and help me.
I gotta get mine too adjusted. What really irks me about some of the things that the NEOC has done is that, remember, they're charged with eliminating discrimination, right? That's kind of their charge. So when people go to them, they're looking for help. They're looking for an advocate. But essentially what I have experienced is that when people go to them, they're just trying to move those cases to a point of saying, well, there's nothing here, right? So remember, those cases have to be investigated. They have to have some sort of back and forth between the aggrieved parties. And then obviously the NEOC has to decide how they feel about that case, whether it's discrimination, there's cause, or there's not. But from my experience, it's been kind of a situation like this. Okay, a aggrieved person comes in, drafts a complaint about why they feel like they've been discriminated against. NEOC reaches out to the party that has been charged with discrimination and kind of asks them, do you have a reason why you did this? And they'll say, and of course, 9.99, 100% of the times they're going to say what? Yeah, we do. It was because he was late. And then they'll say, okay, well, nothing here. But they won't dive into that to show that reason may be fake, right? You can't fire somebody from being late on day 1, on day 100, after you sandwiched in a bunch of discriminatory acts to that employee. So that's kind of the stuff I've seen. And then once they come to me, they feel beat up, right? They feel discouraged. And at that point, they have 90 days to file a federal lawsuit. So I think what they should do is to say, well, remember, if you come to the NEOC, there's a huge chance we're going to dismiss this claim. So what you need to do is you need to go get you a lawyer, because that lawyer is going to advocate for you, because the other side is going to have a lawyer. And if the other side has a lawyer, you're going to need one. But 9 out of 10 times, they don't have that conversation with the aggrieved person. And if they don't, guess what? Those claims are going to get denied, denied, denied. And I encourage you to go look on their website and to see exactly how many claims they have substantiated in the last 10 years. And I can tell you, you've got enough fingers to count them.
I didn't mean to laugh. That slipped out. Oh, sorry about that. I'm trying to be a host and a moderator. folks, we're at the end of our time, and we're going to go over, and we'd like folks to provide an evaluation. We have it in the chat, an evaluation link. You can do that, and also later, if you want to call and leave a voicemail and give us feedback on our programs and also other programs that we might be hosting in the future. So for those who have to log on at our time of 8 o'clock, we understand that, but we want to go forward if there's other feedback or questions. But Potso, one question I was going to ask you. In high school, did the schools ever bring lawyers to be guest speakers? I know sometimes schools and college and universities and high school bring in guest speakers from the community. Did you ever meet any of them in the community? Because I know growing up in North Omaha, I never saw a black doctor till I went to Africa. And again, never seen a black pilot and a lot of things growing up in ghetto North Omaha. So my question is, did they bring speakers in or people like that to be kind of talking to you or help you about making decisions in high school or whatever?
I don't remember back. I think they did show us a book with Thurgood Marshall in it. So I don't know if that counts, but yeah, it's tough. I mean, in high school, it's just more of I can take it back and tell you that it was could you read To Kill a Mockingbird, and that was kind of our legal lesson to get us out of high school. But unfortunately, a lot of people who go through that, especially individuals who are African American who want to be attorneys, they don't get that. They don't get that analysis. They don't get that experience of meeting and seeing what this profession is like outside of reading a book called To Kill a Mockingbird or hearing about Thurgood Marshall.
Wow. Any other questions? Any other feedback? If not, we can end. But any pressing issues?
Yes, I had a question. Brother Potso, it's great to see you again. I'm very grateful to be on the session. But my question would be for those students who are capable of excelling in law school academically, but are facing that financial burden. Do you have any advice of resources they should reach out to, possible scholarships, and things like that that can help offset those costs with law school?
Right, that's a good question. And I think the first thing too is prior to going to law school is understanding what sort of financial aid package you're going to get. But I can tell you there's a lot of organizations once you're in that they'll help you get through, So, I mean, we can take that conversation offline because it's a more personal question about some of the things that you might want to do. But, I always tell people that don't let finances kill your dream, because if that's something that you want to do, I can tell you, it's going to pay off, especially if you're going to put the work in.
Yeah. Any other questions? Any other feedback? We're right up on 8:02, and so I guess at this point, Potso, we're going to close out by saying thank you very much for being here. Any last closing comments before we close out? Potso.
I appreciate all the comments, the questions, and again, some of the things that we're going through in this community, it doesn't take one person to change that. It takes us all. So I always close by saying, one person can't do all, but all can do some. And through some, we can accomplish the goals that we want to see for our community in Omaha, Nebraska.
Good. Well, folks, I see we have some other feedback. We're going to close out anyway, but I really appreciate folks for being able to participate tonight. We had a great audience and so on, and great questions. And we probably want to repeat this at some point down the road and also give some of our frenemies an opportunity to maybe appear on one of our Throwing Down Heavy Lights and share their views. So, Potso, thank you very much. As we always end our program by saying, may the force be with you. Baroko.